Tonight on Primetime Politics, trade war.
This is a very dumb thing to do.
The Prime Minister announces countervailing duties, promising to hit the U.S. economy after Donald Trump imposes punishing tariffs on Canadian goods.
What he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy.
Coming up, we'll get reaction to Ottawa's strategy. Former government House Leader and current Liberal leadership hopeful Karina Gould will join the program. Also, we'll speak with former Conservative Minister Lisa Raitt to assess how effective Canada's counter tariffs will be. And the Federation of Canadian Municipalities CEO Carole Saab, what do communities across the country need to weather the economic storm ahead? This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Canada's relationship with our American neighbors took a very sour turn today. At midnight, the Trump administration went ahead with punishing tariffs on Canadian goods. And then this morning, we heard from the Prime Minister announcing Canada's own countervailing duties on American products while expressing disbelief the U.S. president would move against its closest neighbor and working partner.
So today, the United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense.
And the Prime Minister's words did not end there. Take a listen to what he had to say to Donald Trump directly.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal. But Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
And when asked to comment on legendary investor Warren Buffett, who calls tariffs an act of war, this is what we heard from Justin Trudeau.
So we actually have to fold back on the one thing he has said repeatedly, that what he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy. Because that'll make it easier to annex us, is the second half of his thought. Now, first of all, that's never going to happen. We will never be the 51st state.
Well, earlier today, we did speak with Liberal leadership hopeful Karina Gould, the former government House Leader. Take a listen right now to her thoughts on today's trade measures. Listen, given the moment that we're in, I need to begin with the countervailing tariffs and the very fact that we're now in this trade war with the United States. I wonder, because we as a country are so dependent on the U.S. economically, are we shooting ourselves in the foot by not sticking to negotiation instead of trying to match the U.S. tariffs on some level?
No, my goodness. I mean, what is there to negotiate? We are not going to negotiate away our sovereignty or our economy. I mean, the only thing that a bully responds to is strength. I mean, you can give him your lunch money, but he's just going to keep shaking you down for more day after day. So we have to stand up firmly and strongly to Donald Trump. Our economy is not up for negotiation. Our jobs are not up for negotiation. Our sovereignty is not up for negotiation. So no, I think a strong, thoughtful, intelligent response is what's needed. And absolutely that starts with retaliatory tariffs.
Now, we heard it from the Prime Minister today, believing that this is part of a greater economic or a greater political strategy on Donald Trump's part to economically destabilize Canada to make annexation easier. Do you share that assessment?
Well, I don't know if it's about annexation to that extent, but I do think that he is after critical minerals, our natural resources, perhaps even our water. And I think the fact of the matter is like, again, none of this is up for negotiation with Donald Trump. We actually have a trade agreement already with the U.S. and Mexico and NAFTA 2.0 and CUSMA. So this is not on the table. And we know that Donald Trump likes to go for the maximum in order to get what he wants. But I think we just have to stay strong, stay united, and not break, because that's the only way that we are going to come out of this, as strongly as possible.
Now, you mentioned Mexico, and I was going to ask you a question about that, because yes, we are in a trade relationship with Mexico as well. You yourself worked with the Mexican Trade Mission in Canada for a time before entering politics. How do we find allyship with that country right now? Because they too are facing this punishing tariff, promising to introduce their own countervailing duties come Sunday.
Well, I think we need to be in constant dialogue with Mexico. I mean, what the United States is doing right now is so unbelievable, so ill-conceived, and so hurtful to the three economies, but particularly to the American economy, which is extremely reliant on both Canada and on Mexico. And we need to make sure that we have a united front here. NAFTA works. CUSMA works. This is something that has led to greater prosperity in our three countries, and we need to protect that and defend it. But we need to continue to build a strong relationship, not just with Mexico, but with other like-minded countries. Because if this is how Donald Trump treats his friends, imagine how he treats other countries that he's not as close with as Canada and with Mexico. I mean, it is absolutely astonishing, and it kind of boggles the mind that he would do this. And quite frankly, we're seeing how the U.S. market is reacting to this. I mean, it is having a huge impact on the U.S. economy already on day one. And I think that Canada's retaliatory tariffs are going to have another impact. And then we need to put everything on the table, because we have to ensure that this trade measure that he has put in place does not last long. And he needs to be accountable to the American people for the fact that he is now making food, housing, energy, literally everything in the United States more expensive because of this ill-conceived plan that he has.
Now, you are running to be the next Liberal leader, the next Prime Minister, if that should happen. Where would you look for allyship? You talk about other countries, but specifically, given the fact that Donald Trump has become this global disruptor in a very short amount of time, where would you be looking immediately for economic allyship, political, diplomatic, military partnership right now?
Yeah, so look, I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us as Canada to get closer to our NATO allies that are not the United States. I mean, look, what we saw on Monday with the United States deciding to no longer support Ukraine militarily. There is an imperative for us to work with our friends and allies in Western Europe. I think there's also a space for us to get closer to democratic nations in Asia, in Latin America, and Africa, to really kind of build that democratic alliance around the world. We are seeing Donald Trump go closer to, people like Putin, who illegally invaded Ukraine and who we know is an authoritarian, who does not believe in democracy, who does not believe in freedom, who does not believe in human rights or justice. And now is the time for Canada to live our values on the world stage and to shore up those partnerships and those alliances. I think we have to continue to have a dialogue with the U.S. But it's a very different world this week than it was even 5 days ago, in terms of how quickly he is moving the United States away from a rules-based international order, one in which democracy, human rights, freedom, and justice are the values that we pursue.
Mm-hmm. Now, the government is promising to support Canadians through difficult economic times, because that's what a trade war creates for Americans, also for Canadians, though. What would you be prioritizing when it comes to that file? Obviously, you're no longer in cabinet, but as potentially the next Prime Minister, what would you prioritize?
Well, so there are three things. First is making sure that we have a very strong, robust response to the United States that demonstrates our strength, our unity, and our willingness not to back down, because I think that's the only thing that's going to get Donald Trump to change course and to exit this terrible strategy that he's put in place right now. Second is to quickly stand up income supports for Canadians who have lost their jobs as a result of these predatory tariffs from the United States. And third, to establish a support system for businesses and industries that are also impacted, because I have faith that Canada will come out victorious in this trade dispute. But we need to make sure that we have the good jobs for Canadians to return to when that does happen. So for me, it's really about putting the resources of the federal government to work to ensure that we are supporting Canadians and our industries through these tough times. And maybe one final point there, Michael, is that now is not the time for cuts. When I hear, colleagues or Pierre Poilievre talking about, cuts to federal programs or the federal public service, now is not the time to be having that conversation when we need every federal public servant focused on getting Canada through what is, a major attack to our economy and to our people, and to ensure that we have the resources and the supports needed to help Canadians get through these tough times if they lose their jobs, and get our businesses and our industries weathering this storm so that we can get people back into those jobs when we eventually win this trade dispute.
Karina Gould, thank you for this. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Michael.
Liberal leadership hopeful Karina Gould. You can see the full interview on CPAC's website and on our YouTube channel. Well, here in Ottawa, the U.S. tariffs got Canadians braving the snow and the cold. Take a look at the scene for much of the day in front of the U.S. Embassy today, where emotions were very much in view as the Prime Minister was unveiling his government's plan to hit back against American tariffs. Well, we are now joined by Lisa Raitt, former Minister of Transport, Labour and Natural Resources in the Harper government, currently Vice Chair of Global Investment Banking at CIBC, also the co-chair of the Coalition for a Better Future. Lisa, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Listen, let's start here with the countervailing duties announced by the federal government today, the first round with another round coming in about 3 weeks' time. Do you think they have the power to get the Trump administration to reverse course or at least amend these tariffs in some way?
So I'm going to say no, but I'm going to couch it with, I say no with great sadness. I wish that the retaliatory tariffs would work. I also think that it's not a bad idea to have retaliatory tariffs, but a government is going to have to make sure that the impact is greater on the United States than it is on Canadians. That is key, because we're already going to be feeling some pain from the United States tariffs in general, and it shouldn't be a case where we're going to feel a disproportionate amount of pain from a tariff situation.
And yet we are the smaller economy of the two. Is there anything that can be done that would make a point to Washington outside of these tariffs, given the fact that, again, we are not as large as an economy as the United States?
So I've been searching my brain on that one too, trying to figure out, I wish I had the magic bullet on it. Look, you can characterize different kinds of ways of getting the attention of the United States. You can do it diplomatically, which is one aspect that's currently being carried out, talking to governors, talking to congressmen, talking to senators. You can do it economically, which is what the tariffs are all about, canceling contracts like Premier Ford has done with respect to Starlink. And you can do it in ways in which that have significant impacts on the states. Premier Ford has talked about putting a surcharge on electricity. He's colloquially said, I'm going to cut off the electricity to the United States. I mean, those are pretty big statements to make, especially given the fact that the United States as well has some assets and resources that we rely upon here in Canada that we would be pained if we didn't have access to them as well. For example, in response to saying that we were going to cut off the electricity, I understand that the administration said something on the lines of, well, that's great, we're going to cut off your access to the cloud. And of course, that would have a great impact on Canadians.
Yeah, huge impact, as you say. Now, Donald Trump has made the argument that, for him, or at least to his base, these tariffs will drive investment into the United States. And to be fair, he hasn't really addressed the economic pain it will cause for the average American. But again, tariffs, he makes the argument, is a good policy if you want to bring industry back into the U.S. Is that what we'll actually see, businesses moving south of the border and foregoing Canada as a place of investment?
Two parts to that question. Are Canadian companies measuring up whether or not they should be moving to the United States? The answer is yes. They've been doing so for a while. They are trying to figure out how to mitigate it. We already know of examples here in Toronto in the GTA where companies have opened up manufacturing facilities in the United States because they simply cannot bear a 25% increase on their bottom line. I mean, no one's running 25% profits that allows them to absorb a tariff like that. So they want to keep their company going. This is the kind of thing that they're going to do. The second part, though, Michael, is I wish it were the case that it was apparent and obvious that tariffs are going to hurt Americans more than they will give to America. And the reason being is that Yesterday there was an announcement by a Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturer that they're about to build, or they announced they will build $100 billion in manufacturing facilities in the United States. Donald Trump says the reason why they're announcing that is because I told them I was going to put a tariff on their chips. So here they are building in the States. And that's exactly what I'm going to do in sector by sector, and specifically with respect to Canadian businesses that sell into Canada. So I am greatly concerned. He has proof points that kind of give him the ability to say to Americans, just hold up, wait a second, it's going to be painful. But look, I can already prove to you it's going to be better. You're going to have jobs. Your children are going to have jobs. And the area of the Rust Belt is going to thrive once again with those Canadian factories coming back to America.
Well, to that, we did hear the Prime Minister say today that Donald Trump is trying to destabilize the Canadian economy in order to make U.S. annexation easier. What's your read on that situation?
I am not privy to any kind of diplomatic wires in terms of what the actual foreign policy implications of this are. But I would say that you could certainly wonder whether or not Mr. Trump is serious when he says that there should be no border and that the prime minister is really just a governor. I don't know whether or not he views it in terms of one sovereign state taking over another. I'm sure he views it as Canada has a lot of stuff that we think we should have access to. We haven't been able to get access to it, and we want it. And we think the best way to do that is to beat you into submission economically so that you come to us with a better offer. And we are just beginning to experience the beginning of it.
So what is the best strategy to adopt then, do you think?
Everyone jumps to internal trade barriers. I'm not going to go there first. I think that's important. But I think what we have to figure out is what do we do best in Canada that we can not just sell to the rest of the world, but rather sell to ourselves. Let's look at this opportunity we have. I would point to the housing situation, and that private sector, public sector work together to start building homes. It's a great opportunity to get people working. Construction is a trade that we have in this country and will continue to have. It solves the issue with respect to tariffs going on, our lumber going across the border. So that's one way that you can take a look at it, keep people employed and get an asset out of it at the end of the day that we sorely, sorely need. The second side of it is, and it's maybe a little controversial, but I'll go with it anyway. As the American president kind of isolates the United States from the rest of the world and European countries, the reality is the question will come, do we really want to buy our military apparatus from the United States any longer? And then where can we buy it from? And Canada does have some capacity and some ability to do that kind of work. We can build planes. We can build vehicles. We have built vehicles that are used in places of conflict and places of defense. And why not think about whether or not Canada becomes the substitute for American goods that are currently being sold into foreign countries because they no longer want to do business with the United States?
Well, something to bear in mind as people consider and debate the path forward. Lisa, I always appreciate the insight. Thank you for that.
You bet.
Now, when it comes to how Canadians are feeling in this moment, the Angus Reid Institute did release the results of a new survey today. When Angus Reid asked how Canadians feel about Donald Trump's tariff and annexation threats, the majority of Canadians used words like angry, betrayed, anxious, and scared to reply to the question. And when asked if they support the government response when it comes to tariffs and even a possible embargo on critical exports, they said yes, in the majority, they are in support. Now, the Ontario Premier also showed his support for hitting back on Trump's punishing tariffs. Take a listen to what we heard from Doug Ford, who is also, by the way, the current chair of the Council of the Federation.
Also, starting today, all U.S.-based companies will be banned from taking part in government procurement. Every year, the province and its agencies spend about $30 billion on procurement, alongside our more than $200 billion plan to build infrastructure. U.S.-based businesses will now lose out on tens of billions of dollars in revenues. They only have President Trump to blame. I'm also urging all 444 municipalities to do the same, and I'm thrilled to see some are already stepping up
Well, let's get some reaction to what we just heard from Premier Ford. Carole Saab is the CEO of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Carole, thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me today.
So here you have Premier Ford calling on municipalities, in his province at least, to no longer procure, to no longer work with American cities. Is that a strategy that your organization is thinking of adopting and asking its members to pursue?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it's a strategy that our members from coast to coast to coast are already actively thinking about and pursuing and asking us as an organization for support to help them navigate that field. Municipalities procure quite a bit from American, from the United States overall, and really it could be quite impactful. And so as part of this broader Team Canada approach, it needs to be all hands on deck right now. We need to be using all levers across the country, including those of local government. And local governments across the country are saying we want to be part of bringing an end to this as fast as possible, and we'll use the tools at our disposal as well. And there are complexities involved in that. They're also, making sure that they are able to sort of do the best that they can to protect the jobs and livelihoods in their communities in that context. But certainly, to the extent that they can, using those levers is going to be part of it.
And part of it, too, I would imagine, is doing away with interprovincial trade barriers. And I know, you and I have talked about it in the past, where we heard from provincial officials, federal officials, being very enthusiastic and optimistic that by the 30-day mark, there would be barriers dropped. Well, here we are 30 days plus one.
Yeah.
I don't know where they are right now. What are you hearing on that front?
Yeah, I mean, as we were talking about previously, I was hearing a lot of very positive progress, both from federal officials and also from the premiers when we spent some time with them in Washington as part of a delegation to try to preempt some of what's happening right now. To our conversation earlier, it really is a long overdue conversation for this country. It's been easier for a long time for Canadian companies to trade with America than it has been to do that across our own borders interjurisdictionally here, and that's absurd, and it needs to stop, and those barriers need to come down immediately. And so, if anything can come out of what is a very troubling and concerning moment for Canadians right now, I hope it's that we can start tackling some of these overdue conversations, interprovincial trade barriers being one, really strategically looking at trade enabling infrastructure being another, and also how do we fund growth and how do we work better across governments in this country, and how do we leverage local governments and cities and communities to really drive the economy forward.
Okay, well, let me pick up on that point, because I was going to ask you, without a doubt, these retaliatory tariffs are going to be hard. They're going to be punitive against the United States. It will have an economic impact here. The government talks about support. How do you envision support? You talk about strategic infrastructure. Where do you see that moving in for the federal government and provincial governments to invest in to kind of weather the storm?
Yeah, well, I'll say right now our priorities and our concerns are really two-track. One is immediately what can we do to help bring an end to this as fast as possible, given the jobs and livelihoods that are going to be heavily impacted on both sides of the border where we go forward. And when we look at what needs to happen right now, I think there's an immediate context of what supports might be needed to help stimulate the economy. We're already seeing the markets start to really crash today. We're seeing, and this is just the start of what is going to be, a pretty significant blow to our economy and to local economies across the country. And so there's no doubt that if this carries on for a long period of time, and I mean long in this context isn't really that long, but a small duration of time even is quite impactful, that there is probably going to need to be measures to stimulate the economy more short term. And that looks, the best way to do that, we know, in many parts of the country, is to build infrastructure. And what we're also focused on, though, in terms of this immediate support, is really the longer term. Again, back to what we were talking about, how do we come out of this, doing the things we need to do along the way to protect and support Canadians as best as we can, while also building long-term resilience as a country. And so when we're making those infrastructure investments, let's make them as strategic as possible. What we should be looking, one of the overdue conversations that I said to you is trade enabling infrastructure. And so how are we ensuring that we're looking at the projects that are going to be the most productivity driving, that are going to help generate our long-term resilience and growth?
Like transport highways?
Transport highways. I mean, a number of it. You look at ports, you look at, all the core pieces of infrastructure, which in the Canadian context are lagging and in need of real upgrades and modernization to be where they need to be. And then on top of that, the conversation that, the third conversation I would say that really is overdue and is part of the long-term solution is how do we move our local communities, our cities, our rural regions that are driving industries that are the backbone of our economy, all the way to our cities that have a real impact on productivity. How do we put them on more stable footing long-term? You know, this is an overdue conversation for us as a federation in Canada. It's one of the many conversations that I think we've erroneously labeled as too complex to have as a country. But if we've learned anything from previous shocks, the pandemic being the most recent, it's that we can do all of those things. And now Canadians are depending on us to figure it out. And my hope for the moment and what we're going to be focused on is how do we ensure that we're doing what we need to do in the short term while not losing eye on the need to finally learn the lessons and build the long-term resilience that the country and Canadians accordingly need us to have.
Yeah, resilience, not depending on just one country for the vast majority of our trade. Listen, quickly running out of time, but I wonder about the diplomatic efforts. You've been to the U.S., your members have been to the U.S. What's been the response? Do you believe someone's going to stand up and make the argument for Canada, or is this country alone?
Yeah, I don't think we're alone, you know, and now I have the vantage point of talking to our counterparts in local government. And so again, people who are in communities, who are closest to the order of government, closest to the people. And what we're hearing from our American counterparts, you know, across the political spectrum in the United States is a real understanding of the real impacts that this is going to have on the livelihoods of people in their communities. And so we're hearing from mayors across the United States, and we've been engaging our counterparts in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, but also the counties, National Association of Counties, and we're hearing real support for our message. We're sharing information with them about the real impacts, and there's been a real openness and receptiveness to this. In fact, I will share just yesterday, the U.S. Conference of Mayors passed a resolution overwhelmingly calling on President Trump to not implement these tariffs. And so at a local level, where it's the reality of what's happening at a community level are inescapable. It's very clear that this is going to be damaging to lives on both sides of the border, and I would say we're going to continue those conversations. We have folks on the ground in Washington right now, a second delegation going next week, to continue that conversation about impacts and how we can help generate enough pressure on our respective governments to continue positive progress going forward.
Carole Saab, I appreciate the time today. Thank you for that. Well, that is our program for this Tuesday. We'll have continuing coverage in the days ahead. I'm Michael Serapio. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow. Until then, we leave you now with the Prime Minister and the words he shared on this consequential day across the country. Take care.
I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough, even though we're all going to pull together, because that's what we do. We will use every tool at our disposal so Canadian workers and businesses can weather this storm. From expanding EI benefits and making them more flexible to providing direct supports to businesses, we will be there as needed to help. But Canada, make no mistake, no matter how long this lasts, no matter what the cost, the federal government and other orders of government will be there for you.